But first, an attack on former President Donald Trump causes a seismic shift in the political landscape. The shooting at a weekend rally had immediate impacts for both the tenor of the political contest and the safety apparatus of both campaigns. To discuss it, I'm joined now by retired federal law enforcement officer, safety analyst, and professional risk consultant Mark Baughman. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
I'm also joined here by longtime political consultant and campaign manager John Daigle. Good morning, John.
Morning, Ann. Thanks.
And a note to listeners, this segment is being pre-recorded Monday morning, July 15th, but we will take your calls and questions after the segment. You can reach out at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org or reach out on social media by tagging us on Facebook, Instagram, or X. Mark, let's start with you. Bring us up to speed on what we know now about what happened.
Well, what we know now, what happened, at least with the shooter, Matthew Crooks, I guess he goes by Matthew. Yeah, he's a 20-year-old white male, living, I think, with his parents, had access to firearms, obviously had some rudimentary type explosive devices in the house and in the car. Still don't have a motive as to why he did what he did. Went to the rally, got very, very close, too close, and got up on a roof and started firing at former President Trump, as well as hitting individuals in the crowd, who ultimately taking the life of one of the people attending the rally. For now, I mean, you have a coordinated effort with the federal authorities working it backwards, obviously, and obviously they're going to go back and look at what the Secret Service did and didn't do in the process of this rally as far as protecting not just former President Trump, but also the attendees.
So we are also hearing, I'm sure we've all been hearing these accounts from eyewitnesses, several saying that they tried to warn law enforcement about the presence of an armed man on that roof before the shooting happened. Explain to us, how is it possible that the law enforcement officials, if they were indeed warned about this, did not respond in some fashion and respond more quickly?
You know, when you have events like this, you have the Secret Service is running the show pretty much. And they show up and they run it. You have the Pittsburgh field office that's probably going to coordinate it with the Protective Service detail team that's with former President Trump. The Pittsburgh field office goes out, Secret Service office goes out and makes all the arrangements. They have the itinerary. They plan to, give the state and local authorities and provide, the security measures around the perimeter as well within the rally. Could be the sheriff's office in coordination with the police department there. Butler's about 40 miles from Pittsburgh, so there are some resources available, but it's a fairly bucolic area. But still, they'll cover that whole perimeter in that area. The biggest problem sometimes is the communication. I don't know how they were communicating, if they had a mutual aid frequency they were talking on. Usually that's provided, and maybe that information didn't get relayed quick enough. I know in some of the interviews to some of the attendees, clearly they were making law enforcement aware of Crooks climbing up a building and getting on a roof nearby the rally itself.
Does it appear at this point, though, that perimeter that was established, that security perimeter, did not include this adjacent building? Therefore, the people that were near or around that building weren't being screened, for instance, for having a weapon of some kind?
Yes, it was pretty clear that that building, there should have been somebody on top of that building. A law enforcement representative should have been up there, whether it be one of the Secret Service snipers, the state, local, whoever it may be. And that just didn't happen. I mean, Crooks was roughly a little over between 150 and 130 yards away, which is, with a rifle. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I'm in Pennsylvania right now. A lot of people shoot guns up here. A lot of people hunt. I don't know what he did. He obviously had a membership at a gun club, so it's pretty clear he knew how to work that weapon. I think what startled him was probably law enforcement getting up on that roof. One of the officers, it looks like, got hoisted to the roof and took a peek. He turned and pointed the gun at him, and then quickly turned away and started firing anywhere from 6 to 8 rounds into the crowd. Hitting some of the individuals, taking the life of one individual, and hitting former President Trump in the ear.
And as we know, the former president is recovering and was injured, but not, in a severe fashion. John, this is already a very tumultuous political time. Help us understand how this event changes things for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a short-term change, and we heard of very different tones from both candidates over the weekend. Um, President Biden did a news conference Sunday morning, and the speech from the Oval Office last night, both of which he came off sounding very presidential, and really kind of used that theme of unity. It's Former President Trump has told media outlets that he has torn up his speech and he's writing a new unifying consolatory speech, and the appearance is that it may have changed the tone, but I'm skeptical. I really don't think in the long run either the attempted assassination event or President Biden's poor performance in the debate 3 weeks ago will have long-term lasting impacts on the election. It's 113 days away. That's 113 news cycles. We have 2 conventions. We have possibly another debate and a vice presidential debate. There's a lot that's going to happen between now and November 5th, and I'm not sure if either event, the assassination attempt or the debate performance from Biden, has long-term lasting impacts on the trajectory of this race.
That's very surprising to me. And we should say we're not minimizing, the safety issue here, or the human side of this, but there obviously are very real political considerations given the nature of this race, how close it is, the consequences. The call for unity is interesting. This has been a very divisive, obviously, political world of late. I saw that Melania Trump issued a kind of lengthy tweet also calling for unity, a kind of very emotional tweet talking about her husband as a person and the impact that it would have had on her and their son. How much, like, as someone who's worked on campaigns, what do you think is happening behind the scenes when you have a speech or not a speech like that, but rather a long statement like that issued by the First Lady? Who's helping to craft that? What are the considerations that go into that?
Well, I am sure that Trump's advisors would love for him to adopt a new conciliatory, more unifying theme, and you may see some of that from Trump at the convention. I really don't believe that's in his DNA in the long run. I'm skeptical that he can maintain sort of the Reagan-esque unifying theme throughout the debate. One of the worst things you can do as a political consultant is to try and make a candidate something they're not. Typically, the public sees through it and they appear kind of phony. I don't know that Trump is a natural unifier, and I don't know that trying to shift and become that will work in his advantage. It comes down to this whole race, and again, I've had this conversation with people after the debate. We're talking about an incredibly small number of voters who are likely voters who are persuadable in this race. 99.5% of voters in this race have told pollsters over and over again that their opinion cannot change. We're talking about 6% of voters in 6 key swing states. It's almost the number of voters in Duval County.
Wow.
And they're going to be $10 billion in advertising spent trying to move those 700,000 voters in those 6 swing states over the next 100 days. I'm not sure that either one of these events, will have a major impact on the 99% of likely voters who have already made up their mind.
So just a reminder to listeners, this segment is being pre-recorded Monday morning, July 15th, but we will take your calls and questions after this segment. You can reach out at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Mark Baughman, the start of the Republican National Convention is just hours away at this point. How does this incident impact that event from a safety standpoint?
You'll have some heightened security measures, obviously, put in place in light of what happened. Just to recap, former President Trump, he has a large following. People like to go out and see him. They like to hear him. His constituents, they're very loyal to him. So there's a massive amount of people that show up at these events. When you have those large numbers, that creates more of a problem for security measures, whether they're there to cheer him on or not, or whatever. The Secret Service has the responsibility of assessing what's going on in that crowd. They do in advance. They do, obviously, the security measures in place when the event's going on. Then afterwards, they do a recap of what they did or should have done. Each area, even though Butler is small, it presents its own problems. A smaller area because of just a more rural area, resources may be less. A larger area, you have more resources, but you obviously have more people. So every time they have to assess and weigh what they're going to do as far as security measures. With the convention coming up, you've got a lot of political people there. You have all types of people there, and a number of people could be considered targets to somebody who's not liking a particular side or whatever. So they're going to take all that into consideration. The security measures will definitely be heightened.
Do you think that there'll be any changes to the number of attendees? Would that be possible? Would that be reasonable at this point to try to rein in just the size of the crowd?
Yeah, I think they may end up, keeping a better number, fixed on it with inside the convention. I don't know how many that, what the size is, where that, how many people are going to be in there, but they're going to monitor that. They're going to safeguard it. They're going to use a lot of technology that they may have didn't use up in Butler, and again, they're going back, right now it looks like Crooks is just somebody that's a lone wolf that's had some issues growing up. And I can't speak to what his mindset was. I don't know if they found some form of a manifesto that he's written, so that sometimes happens. But going forward, if it's an organized group of people that are trying to cause problems, that presents a whole nother security problem. If you have multiple shooters, you have individuals that are working in unison with one another trying to do something. I think there's going to be disruption at the convention anyway. So I think they're preparing for that.
Wisely so. I mean, John, we had already heard that there was going to be protests planned prior to this. Mm-hmm. From a political standpoint, I mean, I know you're saying that, we're hearing Donald Trump ripping up his speech, starting over. It's worth noting that one of his key political advisors is Susie Wiles, who's from Duval County, who has a long political history here and is considered a huge influence and resource for him. How much of this this shift do you think is just from a political standpoint an opportunity in some ways for a reset or a new direction for the campaign?
I mean, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And Susie, who is extremely smart about this, I'm sure is trying to convince not only former President Trump, but those around him about the opportunity this exists. And again, it goes back to how you get those 6% of voters in those swing states. If Trump is able to, and his campaign are able to jump on this opportunity, I think it could be huge. I'm just not sure, again, as I said before, that he's capable of making the kind of shift that would be required for him to take advantage of this opportunity. I would expect, again, this will help him with his base, just as Biden's speeches over the weekend probably helped him with his base. You're going to see a very fiery convention. What I would probably expect is you will see the other speakers at the convention come out very combative, very defiant, very fiery, and then Trump to come out with his speech as more of a unifying effect. That would be strategically what should happen. I'd be very interested to see if Trump's able to adopt that tone, even though I'm sure advisors like Wiles and others around him are saying this is a perfect opportunity for him to do so.
There appeared to be almost a little bit of a disconnect initially because some of the people that are, contending for his, at this point, still unnamed VP, running mate, some of the people that are close to him, including his campaign manager, his son, initially coming out, basically blaming Democrats for creating an environment in which this happened, or more directly blaming the current president, Joe Biden, for language that he's been using. It's interesting politically because it does sort of flip the script on what I think Democrats have said about an environment that has been incendiary and language that has been, bellicose from the former president and his camp. But initially there was a lot of, not quite mixed messages, but very strenuous tweets and statements. And then there was this sort of silence where tweets were deleted. There was a statement that went out, a directive from Trump's people to basically don't make any public statements.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some really opportunistic and frankly irresponsible tweets coming out in the first 24 hours after this. We saw elected officials, national elected officials, openly tweeting about the fact that the president had ordered the hit. We saw some very opportunistic messaging from some of the more incendiary members of Congress. And you're right, they did effectively shut that down by Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. How long they'll be able to keep a lid on that will be interested to see. The conventions are times of high emotions and high loyalty, and I think you won't be able to keep a lid on those kind of comments. I don't think it in the long run, you're never, those conspiracy theorists out there, you're just not going to be able to quiet them. They're going to be there. The key question is whether the main leaders, whoever the vice presidential pick is, and Trump, and whether they promote those kind of theories or not. We saw, a couple tweets I saw over the weekend, kind of trying to adopt in the days after the Reagan assassination attempt in '81. He famously had this conversation with his doctor where he asked the doctor whether he was a Republican or a Democrat, and the doctor replied, "Well, we're all Republicans today." There were some people trying to take that. I saw one tweet this weekend that said, "Oh, we're all MAGA today," and I just don't know that flies in today's environment as much as it did in 1981 after the Reagan assassination attempt. So, I guess what I'm expecting to see is a convention with a lot of fire and a lot of very incendiary comments, and I don't think the assassination attempt softened that. I think it will heighten it, if anything.
Mark, you were alluding to what we know about the shooter at this point. We do know that he does somewhat fit a profile of someone who is involved in a shooting of some kind, of any kind, in terms of being a white male, in that age group of in his 20s. But this is obviously an isolated incident. That this is not considered part of any larger attack or effort, as far as we know. Is that correct?
Yeah, right now I think that's what it looks like. If I can just play off of what John said, is that this kind of fervor back and forth makes it really tough for law enforcement and security measures. It's only going to make the job harder to protect individuals that are bantering back and forth if this language continues between both parties. It needs to stop. It needs to be more unifying, if anything, one way or the other. I mean, you do what you do at the ballot box. And I'm not getting into the political side of it. I'm just speaking from a security standpoint that type of, I don't know what drove Crooks to do this, what he was looking at on social media. They're going to go through all his social media. They're going to look at it. They're going to look at his phone. But sometimes this type of, vile comments, all the stuff that's put out there on all the social media sites pushes people into this place. We don't know what his mental instability, obviously there's some issues there. And I don't know, obviously they haven't talked much to his parents, but they need to, obviously. He had explosive devices in the house. He had them in the car. He had access to an AR-15 rifle. Those are things that are going to have to be looked at going forward. And those individuals potentially could be out there again, causing, or thinking this way.
What do you expect is happening right now behind the scenes, Mark, in terms of trying to determine what happened, what went wrong, who, if anyone, would be held accountable in the world of law enforcement for permitting this to happen?
Well, like I said before when we started, was Secret Service runs the show. So when they show up to do a protective service detail, that team that's with Donald Trump stays with Donald Trump. That may change. Those individuals may change. I don't know. They're going to obviously look at the personnel, how they did things, how they carried it out, how their association with local law enforcement. Are they going to give them a local law enforcement maybe a greater role in this? Local law enforcement typically doesn't make the call on this. Secret Service tells them what they need, and then there's joint communication and coordination to carry it out. Secret Services they have a uniform branch, but not in these particular incidences. So they rely on state locals for that uniform presence, that omnipresence that's there. The snipers that were on the roof, I don't know if they made a determination. They keep saying they're Secret Service people, but they could have been state and local people that were just put up on the roof as well. Again, these measures are all going to be taken in consideration. There's going to be some great scrutiny on what happened there in Butler, and going forward, you'll see some changes. Trust me.
John Daigle, what, if any, reaction locally are you seeing from our lawmakers, or are you looking for in terms of messaging, in terms of how they're responding?
I did see comments from the head of the Duval GOP and from Mayor Deegan's office, and they were fairly predictable. I mean, I didn't see anything locally that stood out to me as incendiary. Or I think most of the local elected officials and party representatives on both sides, understood the gravity of the moment and treated it appropriately. I think we saw a lot of that at the national level too. I think it comes down to, as I said before, will it last?
And as someone who's been involved in these kinds of campaigns, obviously not with this sort of level of intensity, but what would you be advising your clients right now if you were in this circumstance, as a Democrat or as a Republican?
Well, as I said, I think Biden had a great opportunity to look presidential, and I think he took advantage of that. I have mixed feelings about whether I would advise Trump to adopt the unity tone that a lot of folks are talking about and maybe looking for at the thing. It comes down to, again, would it be great to go after those persuadable voters who are still out there? Probably yes. But would a different tone and him trying to be somebody he's not impact him with his base? I think that could be the negative. I think overall it comes down to this stage of the game. You cannot change someone's fundamental nature. Trump has to be who he is, and I'm sure Susie Wiles knows that. So I don't know that he's positioned to take advantage of the opportunity that is in front of him because of this. He's not Ronald Reagan, and he's not able to use this event the way Reagan did in '81.
We've been discussing the assassination attempt over the weekend of the former president, and we welcome your calls and comments. John, there was something that you were talking about earlier, which is the VP choice. So that is as yet to be announced. There's still a few people in the running, but the convention, as we said, starts this week, and so the runway is getting shorter for that announcement. What do you think is going to happen?
I mean, a lot of us were expecting the VP announcement on Sunday, but obviously Trump right now wisely is taking advantage of the news cycle and the fact that he had a pretty good weekend with all the coverage of what happened. His announcement of his pick for the vice presidential seat could be as early as today. He might, in true Trump style, drag it out and try to create as much drama as possible. But it does certainly, between both of the attempted assassination as well as what happened with Biden during the debate, it really intensifies the focus on both vice presidential candidates, probably more so than any presidential race I can remember in recent history. You've got two older candidates, both with health issues and so forth. And I think this year the attention on the vice presidents could be much more intense than we've ever seen before.
Because obviously this reinforces just how vital a role the vice president is when you realize we're talking about an attempted assassination attempt, but this was really inches, maybe centimeters from an incredibly different story today.
Absolutely. And I think, again, a lot of folks who watched the presidential debate had the same thing. It's like, okay, the reality of how close Vice President Kamala Harris is to actually maybe someday sitting in that chair, it became very real for a lot of people watching it. So I think it's going to be interesting. We'll find out this at some point this week who the vice president is on the Republican ticket. And CBS has already extended an invitation to both camps for a vice presidential debate. They've offered a date in late July and a date in mid-August. We have no idea if whoever the Trump campaign selects will accept that invitation. The Biden campaign has already said that Vice President Harris would do the debate, and she's an excellent debater. So that event could be a lot more interesting this year than it's ever been before.
We, of course, invite your calls and comments. We have a call from Eric this morning. Good morning, Eric. You're on the air.
Hey, real quick prediction. I think that Trump is going to pick Ron DeSantis for his running mate for reasons that have to do with the Epstein trial and all that stuff that went on. I think that it's interesting. The irony of all this, which no one is pointing out, is that the Republican Party just came face to face with a problem that they've been refusing to deal with for decades, which is a emotionally disturbed young man between the ages of 18 and 25 with access to a firearm. Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Eric. Obviously, it does raise the whole issue of, gun safety. It remains a big issue. We have a comment from Brandon on Facebook. He says the blaming of this attack on the left is pure projection by the right. They are using every excuse except taking responsibility for their fear-mongering and ratcheting of tensions. And then goes on to say that some right-wing personalities have actually been attacking Trump for not being radical enough. How does this change, John, or does it, the positions of anybody that is going to vote in this election when it comes to the issue of guns, gun violence, or the environment that surrounds the current political world?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems, there was a lot of speculation and a lot of wild, irresponsible comments online this weekend. And the truth is, we still don't know much about the motives behind the shooter in this. I mean, we heard that he had given a donation to a Democratic cause. We know that he was a registered Republican. We know that he was a gun owner. But it's still very much up in the air as to exactly where he was psychologically. So it's really hard to assign blame or to try to really figure out any motives behind this at this point. It's not stopping a lot of people from trying. Ultimately, again, what the political persuasion was of the shooter, I'm not sure that's going to make a lot of difference. It certainly will fuel some rhetoric, but in the long run, the people who are going to decide this race, as we talked about earlier, this very small number of likely voters who are still persuadable, their focus is much more on the economy than issues like gun control or abortion or any of the leading issues. Those pollsters have said that those voters who are still undecided mostly are thinking about economic issues.
We also have a comment from John on Facebook. He says maybe now Joe Biden will stop telling the very fine people on both sides and Donald Trump told people to inject bleach lies, or maybe we can stop calling him a Russian agent. I guess that speaks to, John, the fact that there's so many larger divisive narratives in the electorate, that you were saying how entrenched people are in terms of the messaging that they've received.
Yeah, and like I said, that stuff is going to continue. And the hardcore base for each party, that throws around a lot of those terms, threat to democracy and some of those really strong language, those voters aren't going anywhere. The notion that you're going to change the minds of anybody, that the 99% of voters who are firmly set on whether they're going with Trump or Biden, I don't think much of any of that kind of comment is going to change that. We're really talking about what changes the mind of a very small number of voters in 6 swing states who are still undecided.
John Daigle, we appreciate all of your political insights as ever. Thanks for being on the program again.
Thank you.